Hello folks, it's the Post Chaser again. Welcome to another one of my videos. This is part 4 of the series looking at photos of the buses and coaches of East Yorkshire motor services, and this one we're going to look at the years just after deregulation in 1986, so from 1986 to around 1990. That encompasses the privatisation of East Yorkshire, which took place in March 1987 when it was sold to its management. This was not a happy period of time for the bus industry in general. A lot of the management buyouts up and down the country, the managers involved had to remortgage their houses and sell the cars in order to raise enough money to buy the company that they worked for. And that, coupled with competition for passengers on the road and a general lack of investment over the years coming up towards deregulation, meant that there wasn't a lot of money to invest in fleets. A lot of buses that would normally have been withdrawn and scrapped were kept in service. In East Yorkshire's case, the situation was so bad that in 1988 the drivers were asked to vote on one of two options. The first option was to keep the current rate of pay and conditions, but there would have to be large-scale redundancies, and that meant that the service network would need to be cut back as well. That in turn would leave the company open to competition as other firms came in to run the services that had been given up. And then there was a risk that they might try and take over what still remained of East Yorkshire's network. Option 2 was that all drivers could retain their jobs and the service network could be retained as it was, but the drivers would have to accept a reduced rate of pay and worse conditions. And to their credit, they did take option 2. They chose the lower rate of pay so that all of their colleagues could keep their jobs, which was very nice of them. They were a really good bunch of men and women, it has to be said. But anyway, enough of that. Now on with the photographs. We're going to start with fleet number 16. We're going to go in fleet number order as we have done on previous ones of these videos. So in the later years of National Bus Company ownership and in the early years of privatisation, a real push was made to try and expand the coaching activities of the company, along with various other National Bus Company and ex-National Bus Company operations, and indeed some municipals as well, including Hull's own Kingston upon Hull City Transport. They all tried to expand the coaching operations, much to the annoyance of the established coaching operators who thought they should just stick to running buses. Part of the push was vehicle number 16, registered C116DRH. The vehicle was delivered in December 1985. It was a Leyland Royal Tiger Doyen, which was a semi-integral model offered by Leyland. The initial ones were built by Rowe, which was a Leyland subsidiary, but Rowe were closed in 1984, so the later ones were built at the ex-Leyland National Plant at Workington, including number 16. That's where that one was built as well, in Workington. So as I said, it was a semi-integral. It was instead of a separate body and chassis, it was kind of all one structure. Although you could make the running units available to other bodybuilders. There were some with Plaxton bodies that entered service with other operators. But 16 was a semi-integral Leyland product. One of the markets that East Yorkshire tried to break into with the coaches was the business hire and corporate market, which it marketed as East Yorkshire Diplomat. The normal livery for coaches at this time was white with 2 blue bands in different shades of blue, but the Diplomat version had a silver base, as you can see here. And the bus is seen in this first photograph at an unknown coach rally. I think it might actually be the UK coach rally at Brighton, but I'm not 100% sure. And there we have a second photo of number 16 on the forecourt of Annaby Road Garage in Hull, in the company of a Plaxton Paramount bodied Leyland Tiger, which is still in the National Bus Company style coach livery. So in the run-up to deregulation and privatisation, it was decided that the United Automobile Company were too large to privatise in one go, so it was split up. On the 8th of September 1986, the garages at Scarborough and Pickering were transferred by National Bus Company to East Yorkshire, who set them up as the Scarborough and District subsidiary. Among the vehicles acquired was a Leyland Leopard with Plaxton Supreme body, fleet number 27, registered NGR 116T. And it's seen here freshly repainted into East Yorkshire's National Bus Company style coach livery with Scarborough and District fleet names, and it's parked at Scarborough in this view. The bus was new to United as fleet number 1016 in May 1979. Later in 1987, Scarborough and District purchased the Scarborough operations of Wallace Arnold and the associated bus operator Hardwicks Services, and 27 found itself transferred to Hardwicks and painted in full Hardwicks livery. After withdrawal, it went for further service with Classic of Anfield Plain in County Durham. Sister vehicle to 27 was fleet number 28, registered NGR 117T, another Plaxton Supreme bodied Leyland Leopard. This one was new to United as fleet number 1017, again new in May 1979. And again it was later transferred to the Hardwicks subsidiary. It also went for further service after East Yorkshire and Scarborough District finished with it, and in this case it went down to Devon where it worked for a company called Girling's Coaches. So now we see a vehicle in East Yorkshire's privatisation era coach livery, white with two-tone blue bands. This is fleet number 31, which was delivered in June 1987, registered D31OKH. By the time of this view it had been re-registered 931 GTA, using a registration from a convertible open-top ex-Devon General Leyland Atlantean. It was a duple 320 bodied Leyland Tiger, and in this view it's seen parked at Blackpool, the town in which its body was originally built, whilst presumably on an excursion from the Hull area. Blackpool was a fairly popular destination for East Yorkshire. At one point in the 90s they even ran a daily service there during the school summer holidays, that you could have a couple of hours in Blackpool. Myself and a friend took part on that, travelled across from Hull, had about, I think it was about 3 hours in Blackpool, quick ride on the tram and then went all the way back to Hull again. But yeah, you can see the standard coach livery of the time. In this one, the white base with the two-tone blue bands, as opposed to the silver base on the Diplomat one we saw earlier. So next we've got an Iveco 4910 minibus with Robin Hood body, one of 10 delivered in 1987. There were two different variations. The first 5 were coaches, including this bus, number 37 D37 MAG. They had single leaf doors, 16 coach seats and no destination equipment. The second 5 were dual purpose vehicles. They had double leaf doors, destination blinds and seats for 19 people. The fact that the coach ones didn't have blinds didn't stop them being used on normal service. I remember getting on one from Willoughby to Cottingham on the Minsterlink Hesel to Beverley service with just a piece of paper stuck into the windscreen to say where the bus was going. So they were used on normal service as well. They never really found a role with East Yorkshire, to be fair, these buses. They tended to be transferred around a lot. Some of them were sold early, some lasted a bit longer. The coach ones were initially in the silver version of the coach livery as per the Diplomats, as you can see here on 37. The dual purpose ones rather were in the normal minibus livery with a silver base. We'll see that a bit later on a Mercedes. As you can see, this one's been transferred to Scarborough. It's got a proper Scarborough District fleet name stuck in the windscreen, but on the side it's got some temporary Scarborough District sort of sub-names underneath the East Yorkshire name on the side. Very unusual indeed. And this bus later received Hardwicks livery and worked for the Hardwicks subsidiary. I like the Ivecos. They had a really nice burbling exhaust note and a screaming turbocharger, but they weren't everybody's cup of tea, it has to be said. Now, as if there weren't enough problems facing the bus industry at this time, in February 1987 there was an arson attack at Witheransea Garage which destroyed 2 buses. The Bristol VR in the background is 979, which we'll see later on. But in the foreground we've got Plaxton Supreme bodied Leyland Leopard 164, MAG 164P. That had been new in December 1975 to East Yorkshire. As you can see, it was fairly well destroyed. It was scrapped shortly after this view was taken. But what a shame. You wonder what the arsonists get out of it, don't you? It's wonder what they achieve, really. So in the 1980s, East Yorkshire were one of many firms to take minibuses into the fleet. There were 19 Ford Transits and 10 Ivecos that we've already seen. And the standard livery for the minibuses was the silver, you can see here, with blue and red bands. East Yorkshire ones were marketed as Little Bus. In Scarborough they were marketed as Scarborough Skippers. Scarborough also had some Mercedes 608 minibuses that they took over from United. In 1989, quite a large batch of Mercedes 811s and 709s with Reeve Burgess bodywork were bought, mainly for Scarborough to allow the town service to be converted fully to minibus operation, but 4 of the 709s were sent to Beverley, the last 4 to be delivered. And we see one of those here in Hesel Square, number 443F443GAT. As we said, a 1989 Mercedes 709 with Reeve Burgess Beaver bodywork. It's just arrived in Hesel on the 180 Minsterlink service from Beverley. That interworked with 2 other services. At the Beverley end it worked with the 3 Molescroft, so the bus would do a service from Beverley to Molescroft and back on Route 3. Then it would become a 180 and go through from Beverley to Hesel. On arrival at Hesel, it would do the Hesel town service, the 183, and 443 in this view is just about to set off on the town service. I just got off this one. We'll come from Willoughby to Hesel on it prior to going down Hesel Road on a 181 to eventually work our way into town, a long way around. But I just got off the bus on its arrival from Beverley on the 180. So the plan's been changed for the Hesel town service. It'd do a circuit off Hesel, as I said, on the town service, and it would go back through to Beverley on the 180. The suspension on these buses was quite basic. I remember they rode rather like a pogo stick at the back, but they were solid, reliable vehicles. They lasted until the mid to late 90s in quite intensive service, so they were pretty good vehicles really. So the last Bristol VRs that East Yorkshire bought new were a batch of 8 which arrived in 1981, and we see 2 of them in this view on the muck, the parking area behind Hull bus station, both carrying all of Radvert liveries. On the right you've got 520, WKH 520X, which for many years was the Radio Humberside bus, but by the time of this view, in around 1989 and 1990, it's carrying an advert for the Mega Bowl bowling alley, which was on St Andrew's Dock, or St Andrew's Quay should I say, the sort of newly redeveloped fish dock complex. On the left you've got 522, WKH 522X, advertising the Vauxhall car dealer Thompson's, which were the neighbours of East Yorkshire on Anderby Road in Hull. Both of them, as you can see, have got the East Yorkshire fleet name on the front in different ways. 522's got it on a little plate on the radiator grille, whereas on 520 they found room on the actual dash panel to put the fleet name on. 520 is about to set off to York on the 746, which would cause some controversy. Normally the adverts like that were contracted to be shown around the Hull area, so the bus really should have been on locals, but it's probably one of those. It was available and needed the bus, so off it went. So another of the same batch, this was 521 WKH 521X, and as you can see, disaster struck it in February 1987. For several years in the 80s, it carried an all-over advertisement for the long-gone Museum of Army Transport in Beverley. The front was red, the rear was sort of army green, with a diagonal white band separating the two colours. It had just been repainted in that advert again in early 1987. Sorry, correction, 1988 it was, February 88. So it had just been repainted in that livery again in 1988, when it started to be reported on the defect card for making a strange grinding noise. I remember seeing and hearing it on our local bus route. It really was a very loud and unusual noise. But they did various investigations on it back at the depot and they couldn't find what was causing the noise, the problem. So after about a week or so of that, it found itself on the York route, and whilst at speed on the A1079 it caught fire. It turned out the grinding noise was because the gearbox had lost all its oil, and unfortunately sustained high-speed running of the York route down the A road, the A1079, was too much for it. It caught fire. The remains were removed to Pocklington depot, where they're seen in the yard, the nearest depot to where the incident took place. And unsurprisingly, the bus was taken away for scrap shortly after this view. As I said, it was February 1988, not 87 as I said initially. So on the left of this view we've got 520 and its Radio Humberside advert that I mentioned previously, but the main star of the photograph is London Olympian 536 C536 DAT. Still carrying the National Bus Company style Venetian blind local coach livery with post-privatisation style East Yorkshire fleet names, and it's seen there on the moat between runs to Witheransea on Route 76. 536 was quite long lived. It stayed in the fleet into the 2000s, and then when it was withdrawn it passed to Johnson Brothers Tours of Worksop for further service. So in 1988 East Yorkshire acquired 4 long wheelbase Leyland Olympian coaches from London Country North East, and this is the last one of them, 546 B110 LPH, seen as an unknown location, having worked an excursion. It may actually be Blackpool looking at the houses in the back, but I'm not 100% sure about that. As you can see, they carried the coach version of the livery, white with two-tone blue bands. Although this one is seen on an excursion, and they did work the interurban services sometimes, they also worked on local routes quite extensively, and they weren't really suitable. They had a high-speed rear axle because they'd been motorway coaches with London Country. They also had overhead luggage racks, which you tended to bang your head on every time you got on, or I did anyway. Maybe it was just me. But a lot of passengers as well wouldn't get on them when they were on locals because they were waiting for a red bus to come along. So they'd see a white bus coming down the road and just stand back and ignore it. But this one was new to London Country as fleet number LRC10 in March 1985. Shortly after this view was taken, it was re-registered 546EYB to try and hide its age. It served for 9 years with East Yorkshire. It later did receive a version of red and white livery, a dual-purpose version of it, sort of half red, half white, so that cured the problem of people not stopping it because they were waiting for a red bus. But it did 9 years of East Yorkshire. It arrived in 1988. It was sold in 1997. Shortly before sale, it was re-registered again to B162AKH, and it was sold to the well-known independent Northern Bus of Northampton near Sheffield. They had it for about a year, and it was sold again to Cedric's of Wivenhoe in Essex. So we made the point earlier on about vehicles being kept in service longer than you would expect as a result of the lack of investment, and the 1971 Daimler Fleet lines with Alexander body were a good case in point. Just about all of them survived into the privatisation era, and here we see 885 registered WKH 885J on the muck between runs to Cottingham on Route 105. At least one of these actually received the privatisation era livery that you can see on 915 next door to it, but 885 retains National Bus Company Poppy Red, albeit with the privatisation era fleet names on it. It's got this rather unusual modified front panel as well. I'm not quite sure why that was cut away. It wasn't a standard modification. I think it was unique to that bus if I remember correctly. 915 VNB 111L was an ex-Greater Manchester Leyland Atlantean acquired via the dealers KB Central in 1986. As you can see in this view, it's got the destination part of the blind painted over, but it was later exposed and it was fitted with a proper destination blind. So just before deregulation in 1986, in September of that year, East Yorkshire found themselves with some new school contracts and not enough buses to operate them, so they put a call out for second-hand vehicles. Unfortunately, around that time everybody wanted second-hand buses, so they were few and far between. But one of the companies to respond was Northern General, who supplied, among other things, Leyland Nationals and Bristol VRs, but also quite a lot of Leyland Atlanteans, and we're going to see quite a few of those in the next few pictures. So here's a Park Royal bodied Leyland Atlantean, ex-Northern General. This is East Yorkshire's fleet number 905, registration RCN 112N. So this was one of a number of Park Royal bodied Atlanteans that had been earmarked for export to Saudi Arabia after Northern had finished with them. So they'd actually removed the centre part of the roof panels, and East Yorkshire put the roofs back on most of them after they bought the vehicles. A couple of them they didn't bother, they just left them as kind of weird looking open toppers. They weren't that successful as open toppers because they still had the upper deck side windows, so you couldn't tell from the street that they were open top. But 905 was one of the ones where they put the roof back on, as you can see. The Park Royal body ones they got from Northern weren't particularly long lived. They'd been allocated to Tynemouth on the coast, and the sea air had taken its toll on the bodywork structure, so they tended to be sold quite quickly. 905 was sold on to Smiths of Tysoe in around 1989 near Birmingham, who traded as Your Bus, and it's seen actually in Your Bus ownership. You wouldn't be able to tell, it's still got the East Yorkshire livery and fleet names on it, but it's actually in Birmingham in this view, working for Smiths. They kept it for a few years actually, they had it into 1992 certainly, so it did probably longer with them than it did with East Yorkshire. So it had been new in August 1974 to the Northern General subsidiary company Gateshead and District. It was originally fleet number 212N, and also when new it had two doors, but Northern had rebuilt it to single door long before they sold it. So a number of the ex-Northern General buses had Eastern Coachworks bodies. To be fair, I was never a fan of these. The dual door version of the Eastern Coachworks body appeared to have had its seats thrown in at random, and they felt quite sparse inside as well. They also seemed to make a strange growling noise rather than the normal Leyland Atlantean howl that you'd expect. So I was never a massive fan of them, but they were fairly solid buses. They served for quite a while with East Yorkshire. This one was MPT 307P. It had been used in Northern in November 1975 as fleet number 3307, and it arrived with East Yorkshire in July 1986, where it became fleet number 907. In this view it's parked at Beverley, where it seemed to have spent quite a period of time actually. As you can see, the buses had two doors, but the centre door was never used in East Yorkshire service. It's got a bit of metal attached across it with no entry written across. Despite the fact they survived until about 1994-95, only one of these buses was ever rebuilt properly with a single door conversion using panels and a window from a Bristol VR. The rest of them just ran with the centre door panelled off, as you can see there, for all of the careers. Another one, the same batch, again new in November 1975 to Northern as fleet number 3308 was MPT 308P, which became 908 with East Yorkshire. It's seen there on the muck between runs to Headon on Route 78. The Eastern Coachworks bodied Atlanteans have been at Gateshead for their lives, a bit inland, so they were in better condition body-wise than the Park Royal ones, hence why they lasted a bit longer. Just out of interest in this one as well, you can see a National Express Rapide coach loading up on the corner of the muck there. This was actually the coach departure point for Hull at the time. It's not a very impressive sight at all, is it, on the sort of wasteland of the muck? But that's where passengers would embark for places like London and Birmingham and things like that. At various times there were old buses parked there attached as waiting rooms. I believe one of the porter cabins at this time was actually in use as a waiting room. But yeah, not a very impressive departure point. It was rebuilt in the sort of early to mid-90s with some proper sort of hard paved surface for the coaches to depart from and some buildings for passengers to wait in. There was a bit of a cafe and toilets and things put in just to make it a bit more pleasant. But at the time of this photo, that's they just went from a corner of the muck, as I say. And just another view of one of the same batch. This is the form of 3309 at Northern, again new in November 1975. East Yorkshire fleet number 909, registered MPT 309P. Again, it's worked on the 78 from Headon, and it's pictured on the muck. And again, you can see a National Express coach in the background with the passengers just about to get on it. Securing the knowledge that wherever they were dropped off, the facilities would be better than they'd had been in Hull when they got on. So this bus and 907 that we saw as well had the early style of East Yorkshire fleet name on a vinyl basically, with a white background and blue lettering. Whereas 908's got the later version that's kind of silvery grey colour, you can just see there. So another source of second-hand vehicles in 1986 was Greater Manchester Transport. In their case they came via the dealers KB Central of Anston, and this is VNB 102L, which was given East Yorkshire fleet number 914, but had been new to Selneck PTE, the forerunners of Greater Manchester, as fleet number 7002. And it had been new in September 1972. It's seen here around 1990. We can tell that because 919 standing next to it. I'll come back to 919 in a minute. As you can see, it's had a bit of a hard life. It's on Route 46 to and from Willoughby by the look of it. You can see the front upper deck window has been replaced with one with grey window rubbers rather than the black ones it would have had. And it's looking a bit scruffy. It's coming towards the end of its East Yorkshire life by this point. As I say, it arrived with them in August 1986. It was sold for scrap in 1991. So 919's got an interesting history. It was registered NJI 1252 at the time of this photograph. When it arrived with East Yorkshire, it was carrying its original mark, which was SXG 52H. It was new in 1970, one of 12 Atlanteans with Northern Counties bodies, new to Teesside Municipal Transport. Their successors, Cleveland Transit, had them rebodied in the early 80s. They stripped the old bodywork off. They rebuilt the chassis to AN68 standards with a Leyland 680 engine, and then sent them back to Northern Counties to have new bodywork fitted to them. In the case of 919, it was rebodied in February 1986. 8 of the 12 were bought by East Yorkshire in about 1990. The other 4 stayed with Cleveland, but they did work in Hull. Cleveland Transit bought Kingston upon Hull City Transport, KHCT, in 1993, and the 4 survivors came down to Hull. So for a period of time in about 1994, you could see all 12 of the rebodied Atlanteans from Cleveland working around Hull, albeit for 2 different operators. 919 lasted until the late 90s of East Yorkshire, so it was rather more long-lived than 914 had been. And then just finishing off this lineup on the right-hand side there, you can see 529, a Leyland Olympian with Eastern Coachworks body, which has been given the cherished registration GRH3Y off a coach by this point. So another one of the ex-Cleveland Atlanteans, again rebodied in February 1986, was 932, still carrying its original registration SXG49H in this view, but shortly afterwards it would be re-registered as FBZ2932. After East Yorkshire withdrew it in the late 90s, it passed to the Halton Price Crime Prevention Panel, and then later on it was exported to northern France, and it was last reported there in 2021, so it may well still exist in northern France somewhere. In this view it's on the muck, parked up between duties, and you can see a couple of Bristol VRs across in the background there as well. Not that you'd know it, but this is East Yorkshire 935 in East Yorkshire ownership. The former 3265 with Northern General, still in full Northern Tyne and Wear PTE livery with joint fleet names, registration PCN 891M. This was another one of the Park Railbody Atlanteans acquired from Northern in 1986. It was new in July 1974 to the Tynemouth and District subsidiary of Northern as fleet number 191M, and it originally had 2 doors, although as you can see Northern had converted it to single door at some point before they sold it. So in this view it's at Driffield Garage, parked on the forecourt. Shortly afterwards it will be sent down to Anderby Road in Hull and painted in red and white fleet livery, and it later works from Anderby Road Garage on normal service. I think it's in Skulls use when it's seen here. It was one of the few Park Rail ones to arrive from Northern with its roof intact, but the Tynemouth there had played havoc with the bodywork, as we mentioned earlier on. It didn't have a particularly long career with East Yorkshire before it was withdrawn and sold for scrap. And now we come to 952. So this was new in 1974 to East Yorkshire, looking rather like this. I'll just show you this one. This is 954, the next photo in the sequence. So that's how it looked when it was new, and indeed up to the end of the 1980s. In 1989 it was selected for refurbishment. As I mentioned at the start of the video, money was tight at this point in the bus industry in general, not just in East Yorkshire. And various people came up with refurbishment and rebodying schemes to try and extend the lives of older vehicles at a fraction of the cost of new buses. The refurbishment package this one went through was offered by the dealers Kirby Central, who we've mentioned already in connection with the Greater Manchester Atlanteans, but the work was actually carried out at South Yorkshire Transport's engineering workshops in Rotherham. It was supposed to be the first of several of this batch to be done, but it remained unique. In actual fact, the management were quite disappointed with it. They'd already booked a press launch with the Hull Daily Mail newspaper for its arrival back, and that went ahead. But they weren't very impressed at all with what had been done. On the inside, the floor had been recovered with some bobbled vinyl material that was popular about the late 80s, early 90s. The idea was that it improved grip for passengers, which it did when it was new. Unfortunately, when it wore down a bit, it tended to go really smooth, and if it got wet, it was absolutely lethal. But they recovered the floors in that. They painted the seat frames in a different colour. They reupholstered the seats with maquette rather than the original vinyl. But the seat backs and the interior panels remained original. The seat backs upstairs even had stubbers on them to stub out cigarettes still. There were some shark's tooth edges put on some of the steps on the staircase, for example, and there were some high visibility handrails put towards the front of the bus to what was called DIPTAC specification, Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee, but not much was actually done to the inside of it. Externally, the original grey window rubbers were replaced with more durable black ones. The front was replaced, the lower front was replaced with an Alexander R-type unit to make the bus look more modern, and the rear registration plate was enclosed behind glass where it was previously just in a cutaway and the bodywork. The whole ensemble was topped off with an electronic destination blind, and that was it really. Not much work was done. Only the panels that were damaged were actually replaced. None of the body framework was touched, and most of the panels were actually original as well. So the bus ended service after its press launch on Hull local routes. It was intended for the 33 to World Road, but in practice it worked more or less anywhere around the Hull area. The electronic blind didn't last for very long. As you can see, it's playing up in this view here. The combination of the original leaking bodywork and the hard ride of the leaf springs of the Atlantean suspension saw the blind off. The bus ran for quite a period of time with bits of paper in the windscreen before the blind was taken out and a set of roll blinds were substituted. Shortly after it arrived back, the original registration number PAT952M was replaced by the plate you can see here, TIJ952. And then when the bus wars broke out in 1992 and 93, East Yorkshire opened a second Hull garage to cope with the extra buses that they ran at the time at Headon Road, and 952 found itself transferred there along with various other one-offs and waifs and strays and things, and it worked from Headon Road towards the end of its career. It was withdrawn in 1995. Just before withdrawal it was re-registered again as RRH 234M. And I remember going on it about 2 weeks before it was finally withdrawn. It was a really sad sight. The engine was misfiring. The bodywork crashed and rattled alarmingly all over the place around you. It was in a terrible state, really. So, unsurprisingly, it was sold for scrap and it was withdrawn. Incidentally, when it was still quite new, 952 had received some front end damage, and for some reason the Midland Red Carlisle Works in Birmingham had tended to do the repairs. My dad was an express coach driver and knew his way to Birmingham, so he was given the job of driving 952 with no windscreen in it all the way from Hull to Birmingham down the motorway. How times change, you'd never be allowed to do that now. But yeah, a very interesting bus, seen here on the muck between runs. It appears to be on the 56A to Fleet Estate, but it's showing Wold Road. In fact, no, I think it's supposed to say Hold Road, actually, Holderness Road. So, but as you can see, the blind's playing up. But yeah, it's between runs on the Fleet Estate service, the 56A. It would have been running alongside Routemasters on there. As I mentioned in the Routemaster video, there weren't enough to do the enhanced service on there, so they had to use some normal buses as well. And that's probably what it's doing in this view. So as we said, that's how 952 looked before it was refurbished. It's actually in the background of this view. This is 952 in the back there. But the main star of the show here is 954, PAT954M. Seen on the standing Hull bus station, about to go off to Fleet Estate on the 56A. In early 1987, the Atlanteans, the 1974 Park Royal Body Atlanteans, were dedicated to the 56 and 56A Hull to Long Hill and either Bilton Asda or Fleet Estate services, and they stayed on there until May 1988 when they were displaced by Routemasters, and that's where we see these two vehicles now loading up for the Long Hill service. 954 was quite interesting. About this time it was repeatedly reported on the defect card for making a strange creaking noise as it went round corners, particularly the roundabout on the Long Hill estate at Shannon Road. They did various investigations on the suspension, they couldn't find a problem, they replaced a few of the springs, the problem persisted. Eventually they took the panelling off the bodywork and found that the framework had rotted away, and the creaking noise was actually the upper deck moving around in relation to the lower deck when it went round a corner. Peter Shipp, the managing director of East Yorkshire, was prepared to withdraw the bus. He thought it was beyond economic repair. But the body shop foreman, Eric Smith, known as Butch Smith, I believe, skilled craftsman, leading a team of skilled craftsmen, he said he could do something with it, and he painstakingly rebuilt the framework and put the bus back together as good as new. It's probably, this photo is probably taken after that was done because it looks to be freshly painted. But yeah, they rebuilt it, put it back into service as good as new. And it lasted for several more years. The 1974 Park Royal Atlanteans were really solid, reliable buses. They owed nobody anything by the time they were withdrawn. They were really well used. Served East Yorkshire well. They were withdrawn between 1988 and 1995. So now we come to Bristol VR, one of the Eastern Coachworks bodied low height examples with Leyland engines. This is 961 RKH 961R. Which was new to East Yorkshire in November 1976. It was always quite distinctive because of its top-mounted electric windscreen wipers. Most Bristol VRs had bottom-mounted air ones, including most of the East Yorkshire ones, so that made it stand out as well. Oh yeah, and for a few years in the mid-80s it was bright blue as well in the National Travel World, all over adverts, as you can see here, so I suppose that made it stand out as well. But it's here on the muck, in between runs to Cottingham on the Route 60 via Priory Road. There's been a real effort to stick East Yorkshire names on. I think in National Bus days, if I remember rightly, it didn't have any on. But in privatisation times, with various independent operators appearing, they were very keen to show which company the bus worked for. So you can see it's got a large East Yorkshire on the front and a smaller one above the wheel there on the side. So 961 worked for East Yorkshire for its whole life. It was withdrawn and scrapped in July 1996. So another Leyland engine, Bristol VR, this is 975 WAG 975S, new in November 1977. If you'd asked me, I would have told you this was never a hull bus, but it was. I've double checked on a 1987 fleet list and allocation, and it was allocated to Anlaby Road, Hull at the time, so it's on a Hull local route. But I don't really remember it being a Hull bus, to be fair. It's on the 44 to and from Willoughby Square, and it's still in National Bus Company poppy red and white livery, albeit with privatisation era East Yorkshire fleet names stuck on. Some of the Leyland ones didn't have a very long life. Leyland decided to stop producing engines in the mid-1980s, and a couple of years afterwards it decided to stop producing spare parts for engines, so being a Leyland engine vehicle was something of an Achilles heel. But despite that, this one had a long life. It was withdrawn and scrapped as late as 1998, so it must have been one of the last ones of the Leyland engine vehicles still in service, so it's quite a remarkable achievement really. Another one of the same batch. This is the second victim of the Withering arson attack. This is 979 WAG 979S. Again destroyed by fire in February 1987. You can see it there with 164 that we saw earlier behind it. Unsurprisingly, it was taken away for scrap shortly after this photograph was taken. So on withdrawal from passenger service in 1979, the 1965 AEC Renown with Park Royal Body 780 registered CKH 780C became a driver training bus, and it's seen here towards the end of its life, towards the end of the 1980s, with its replacement, which was an ex-Southampton AEC Regent 5 with Neeps end body registration BOW 503C. That bus had been new to Southampton Corporation in 1965, and it was repainted into the traditional blue and primrose East Yorkshire livery and given the fleet number T1 for its training duties. Both of these vehicles still exist as far as I'm aware. BOW 503C is restored to full Southampton livery and is preserved. 780, the latest photo I can find of it was about 2014, and it was on tour in a semi-derelict condition, but I think it still exists. Hopefully it'll be restored again at some point in the future. So we've got a couple of rubbish photos now taken by a very young pacer chaser on a very rubbishy camera, but these show the atmosphere of the period. In 1987, East Yorkshire bought various local independent companies, including Cherry Coaches of Beverley, and we see one of the Plaxton Supreme bodied Leyland Leopards heading away from the camera up Beverley Road in Willoughby in around 1988. Not a very good photo, but as I say, it just shows the atmosphere of the time. Shortly before they were bought by East Yorkshire, Cherries had moved from the traditional base in Beverley down to a depot at Springfield Way in Anlaby, so I think this coach is heading away from the depot to take up its duties. And then just turning around for about 180 degrees, I've taken this photo on Beverley Road, Kirkella, but I'm standing in the same spot, I'm just facing the other way. And that's the next Northern General Atlantean loading up on the stand for the 151 to Hull via Anlaby. You can just about see on the side of it, it's got the advert featuring Ready, which was a smiling double-decker that was used in marketing materials by East Yorkshire in the early privatisation days. The slogan is Ready for You, and you can just about see Ready smiling away there. It's one of them things I'd kind of half forgotten about, but I mentioned it to a friend of mine recently who doesn't have an interest in buses, and he went, "Oh yeah, Ready, I remember that." So yeah, it did have more impact than perhaps people thought at the time. And then the final two photos of this video, we're going to look at the vintage vehicle fleet that was built up in the late 1980s as another string to the bow of East Yorkshire. The idea was they could be hired out to wedding parties, etc., and they could also attend rallies and give publicity to the company, but the trips to rallies were normally marketed as excursions, so you could actually book to travel on the vintage vehicle to the rally as well. The original one bought was a Bedford OB fleet number 100, but in 1989 it was joined by this vehicle, fleet number 99, registered DV7890, which was a 1931 Leyland Lion that had been new to a Devon area operator. Some sources say it was Devon General, but a lot of people dispute that. There's quite a lot of mystery about the sort of background of this vehicle. What is known is that the body on it is post-war. It's circa 1947. Again, some people say it's a Birmingham body, but again, other people dispute that as well. Yeah, what we do know about it is it's a 1931 Leyland Lion chassis with a post-war body, and it's seen here at a rally alongside a preserved coach from the Scots Greys fleet of Darlington. In In the late 1990s, this bus was sold to Snaiths of Otterburn in Northumberland, and I believe they still own it now, actually. And then we've got 1956 Willowbrook-bodied AEC Regent 5, number 644, registration VKH44. That was withdrawn from normal service in 1972 and passed to preservation. In 1990, East Yorkshire bought it back from preservationists. They bought it from a preservationist called Rod Hebden, who later on joined East Yorkshire as a driver and featured in several episodes of the TV series On the Yorkshire Buses, where his claim to fame was he was the driver who sold the boss a bus. We met driver Brian Latus in part 3 of this series, driving the first East Yorkshire route master to run in passenger service, and here he is. By the early 1990s he was something of an odd job man around the garage in Hull. He did occasional bus driving as required, but he also did errands, and part of his remit was to look after the vintage vehicles. So if they were hired out or they were due for a rally, he was responsible to make sure they were cleaned inside and out. And he'd also check the Bedford and the Leyland line for fuel. They were petrol engine, they couldn't be fuelled at the depot. And he'd also badger the engineering staff to get them on the pits and give them the attention they needed, because they were usually quite reluctant to do the vintage vehicles. They preferred to spend the time working on the actual normal service fleet. But here we see Brian posing in front of 644 on the forecourt of Allaby Road Garage. Brian died in 2020. Fittingly, when his funeral cortege passed the garage, 644 been brought out onto the forecourt so he could see it for one last time, which was a really nice tribute. Just a few timetables to finish off the video, just to show the kind of marketing that was done around this time. Got a Scarborough district timetable there for the Scarborough Skipper minibus network, the 15 up to Cloughton and Ravenscar. Then there's Ready that I was just talking about on the front of a timetable for the 151, 152, 153 Hull Allaby Willoughby Square. So yeah, it says Go Ready on the timetable, and there's Ready smiling away on the front of the timetable. He also made it onto the back as well, along with the exhortation to support your local service. And then just finally we've got a couple of timetables for the Minster Link, the Hesel to Beverley service, which was later numbered 180. You can see a Ford Transit on both of them, but the one on the left is smiling in a Ready style. So anyway, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please check out the first 3 parts of this series. Part 1 looked at East Yorkshire buses before 1969. Part 2 looked at them during the National Bus Company era, so from 1969 up to 1986. And Part 3 looked at the AEC Routemaster buses that were operated by East Yorkshire between 1988 and 1995. The plan is for Part 5 to cover the early 90s. So from 1990 to around 1995, the period of the bus wars and the acquisition of various other local independent companies as well. So look out for that coming before much longer, hopefully. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please press the like button so more people can find it. And please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already. But as always, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.